Welcome boys and girls, Costine here with a discussion about the Tides of Torment DLC and what it needs in order to be amazing. Now, we're about a month away from the release of the DLC, and right now is the time to talk about these things because Creative Assembly is still optimizing things, doing QA testing. They're probably going to start their marketing campaign for the DLC in a week, maybe less than that, hard to say. But they are going to start it soon enough. Usually it's about a month before the release of the DLC, so probably next week they will do so. Maybe 2 weeks from now, hard to say exactly. But when you're dealing with a campaign in a single player game, there are several ways to make it interesting or challenging, if you will. Now, what many game developers, many modders, and even many players think of when it comes to interesting or challenging is they tend to think in the idea of we can make it interesting and challenging by limiting player resources. From RPGs to shooters to strategy games, limiting resources, ensuring the player takes more damage than an opponent. It's the standard when it comes to difficulty, when it comes to making a foe harder to defeat. That is, from my perspective, the bad way of making a single-player experience interesting. Instead, the better way of making a single-player experience interesting is to give the player a lot of tools available to them, so units in the case of Warhammer 3, different lords, different heroes, but then also putting them in a situation where they have to use them in order to win, and use them effectively. In something like Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition campaigns, or in Age of Mythology, this takes the form of you can build a massive army, but so will the enemy have a massive army. In the case of Warhammer 3, that takes the form of Malachi McCason, the most played campaign that Creative Assembly has ever released, and the best campaign Creative Assembly has ever released. And the reason Malachi is so awesome is because he absolutely fits the bill. He is a powerful legendary lord with lots of resources, but he's also dealing with a lot of different things. So when we're looking in Warhammer 3, the way this works, and generally speaking with racial reworks, they try and make them work with the legendary lords they're about to release. But in the case of the dwarves, what Creative Assembly did for the dwarves is as follows. They gave the Age of Reckoning. And Age of Reckoning forces you to go out there and engage with things. This is more about short-term objectives. It's also great that that if you're not at war with someone, you will probably get an event during an Age of Reckoning to get into a war with the faction and get potentially a lot of grudges. The game is pushing you to go out there, engage with your opponents, go fight wars, and maybe get a bit uncomfortable with those opponents. Because, for instance, the war you might have, the event you might have initially might target Fraught, for instance. In this case, I took Help It, but it could also target Trog, it can target Prague or Azazel. That is a bit uncomfortable, but remember, Malachi is a powerful lord. It is good for him to be uncomfortable because he is actually you are then actually forced as a player to make those kind of decisions. But that's just short term. Many campaigns, or vast majority of them, do have some short term threat to deal with. Where things start falling apart in most campaigns is in the long term, in the medium term, and in a longer campaign. This is precisely the kind of issue that exists with Omens of Destruction. Because yes, you do have Arbol as an example, lots of short term objectives, but you quickly reach a point in an Arbol campaign where the power you have outscales the opponents you are dealing with. Yes, the game does try and spawn rogue armies for you to deal with, but those are never really going to be that much of a challenge. They're passive armies. It's not like your opponents are just going to be stronger. In some ways, Oxyatl is better because he actually has a reason to go engage with stuff, because then there's various negative effects that he then has to contend with. And on top of that, Lizardmen do force you to think more about economy and so on, as opposed to Khorne slaughtering everything in their path. Of course, Lizardmen are not a great race, but the intent behind Oxyatl's campaign is pretty solid. Malachi, however, is much better than either Arbol or Oxyatl or any other campaign in the game because he also has midterm and long-term objectives. In terms of long-term objectives, you do have confederations of legendary lords, which significantly change the entire campaign dynamic you have. And the way you confederate them is you don't spend dozens of turns building a resource. You can, but rather the way you do so is you fight, you get a lot of grudges, and depending how fast or slow you're doing it, you can confederate others. And it's your choice when you do so. And that opens up a whole different area of the map that you have to deal with. A campaign where you confederate Grimbrindle first versus Forgrim is a very different situation than confederating Ungrim or Forik first. Very different dynamic, very different considerations to have in a campaign based on it. So that's long term. Then of course you have to consider the legendary grudges. So think on this. Short term you have your initial enemies, but you also have Age of Reckoning. Long term you have legendary grudges and confederation. Midterm is where this specifically applies to Malachi, and it's through his adventures. So midterm you have these kind of choices of adventures. You pick an adventure, it costs you money, but it's highly beneficial you do so because you get various rewards and free units from an adventure. Really, the cost of starting an adventure is more so about getting those units. And what you get over here through an adventure are a series of decisions that you make beyond the regular ones you have in a campaign. For instance, fight a battle with an enemy cavalry unit in the enemy army. Pretty easy stuff, but then you have things like, construct a certain building, for instance. But really, more importantly, you have objectives to deal with certain foes, kill certain enemies with units. This pushes you again outside of the comfort zone, and it gives you the resources you need to tackle different foes across a campaign area. And that is the brilliance of Malachi, because he does go out there and confront various opponents in his campaign using the resources he gets through these adventures. And there's a lot of different opponents. Not all of the balancing here is perfect. The Greenskin one, the Goblin Hewers, or the Jara Bombers are less than stellar, especially those that take you far afield to deal with certain rogue armies. But the intent of the system really makes the mid-game far more interesting. So this is the reason why Malachi ends up being such an amazing campaign. It's not because Malachi has a doom stack of gyrocopters, though he does have that. It's rather the kind of dynamics that exist in his campaign beyond the usual campaign situation you endure. And then on top of that, you also do have to deal with Arbol, Archeon, the Demon Prince, Epidemius, etc. I mean, if Borosursus dies, it's gonna be a nasty affair very, very quickly. You can help him out, and that gives you more choice. You have to vary your approach, depending on what other things are going on. You're not fully in control of the situation for a very long time. And that is the brilliance of it. This is the one case of a campaign that you can play in so many different ways, so many different times, that it takes hundreds of hours to really get tired of it. Even if you're not necessarily fond of the Dwarven playstyle, it still is an amazing campaign dynamic. Always could be improvements, but this is the closest we've gotten to a perfect Total War campaign in any game that CA has ever released. And that is precisely the model CA needs to follow in Tides of Torment. Not in the specifics of the dwarves or Malachi's adventure, but rather in the idea, the intent behind the campaign. An interesting early game with more choices layered on top of the regular ones, an interesting mid game, and an interesting layered late game. That is what makes Malachi's campaign work. How they do that specifically depends on a race lord by lord basis. But that would be what I would want from CA, as opposed to the normal stuff we do get in DLCs, which is we get a lord, we get some units, we get some heroes, and enjoy the fun. It's not really fun. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out.